Bobby Mitchell's weathered hands froze on the kennel gate latch, his morning coffee tumbling to the gravel as Rex's frantic digging sent dirt flying in perfect arcs. The German Shepherd wasn't just digging, he was excavating with surgical precision, blood streaking his black and tan coat. What they thought was an injured canine refusing retirement was actually a desperate messenger. The rhythmic metallic tapping from 20 feet underground made Bobby's knees buckle. Margaret Patterson stumbled backward, her scream piercing the Virginia morning as she recognized the sound, the same SOS pattern her missing daughter used to tap on her bedroom wall during thunderstorms. Bobby's mind raced between the fresh grave markers scattered across the development site and Rex's relentless focus on this exact spot. His late wife's voice echoed, "That dog knows things we don't, Bobby." "Call Sheriff Davies now," Bobby barked into his phone, his voice cracking with 20 years of police instinct. But who was buried alive beneath their feet? And how long before the tapping stopped forever? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The morning sun cast long shadows across Millbrook, Virginia, a town where everyone knew your grandmother's maiden name and your business before you did. Population 8,247, nestled in the Blue Ridge foothills, where the biggest excitement usually came from the annual Apple Festival or Friday night football. That was before people started disappearing. Bobby Mitchell had called this place home for 67 years. The last 43 in uniform. His weathered face told stories of midnight domestic calls, lost children found, and the kind of small-town policing where you knew every family's troubles. 2 years ago, when Clara passed from cancer, the town expected him to fade quietly into retirement, maybe take up fishing or woodworking like other widowers his age. Instead, he found himself visiting the police kennels every Tuesday morning, drawn to a German Shepherd who understood loss as deeply as he did. Rex had been Officer Tommy Sullivan's partner for 5 years before the accident. 6 feet tall with shoulders that filled doorways, Tommy was the kind of cop who remembered every kid's birthday and never wrote a ticket without a warning first. When his patrol car went off Devil's Curve 3 months ago during a rainstorm, it broke more than just Bobby's heart. It shattered Rex completely. The department tried pairing the dog with 3 different handlers, but Rex would just sit in his kennel, amber eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for a partner who would never come home. "He's got PTSD just like soldiers," Captain Frank Patterson had explained during their monthly coffee at Millie's Diner. Patterson was cut from different cloth than most small-town cops. Sharp suits, sharp mind, 20-year veteran who'd transferred from Richmond after some kind of family tragedy. Word was he'd lost a daughter, though he never talked about it. "Sometimes the best thing is to let sleeping dogs lie, Bobby. But sleeping dogs don't dig through frozen ground with bleeding paws, and they don't respond to sounds only they can hear." Margaret Patterson, Frank's wife, worked part-time at the veterinary clinic and had been quietly documenting Rex's behavior. 55, with graying auburn hair and nurse's hands that never stopped moving, she'd grown concerned about the dog's recent obsession with the old Hartwell property. The Hartwell place sat on 40 acres of prime development land, purchased 6 months ago by Sunrise Holdings for a luxury subdivision. Local families were buzzing about property values and job opportunities, but Margaret noticed things others missed, like how Rex would pace the fence line every evening, ears pricked toward the abandoned civil defense bunker that dated back to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Bobby's modest retirement savings were dwindling faster than he'd planned. Clara's medical bills had eaten through their nest egg, and his police pension barely covered the mortgage on their small ranch house. At his age, part-time security work was about all he could manage, but watching Rex suffer felt like watching his own purpose slip away. The dog was the last connection to his old life, to Tommy, to the belief that protecting and serving still meant something in a world that seemed increasingly broken. The call came on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other. Bobby was nursing his second cup of coffee, reading yesterday's paper for the third time, when his phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Patterson. "Rex is acting strange again. Can you come?" 20 minutes later, Bobby stood outside the police kennels watching Rex pace in tight circles, whimpering with an urgency that made Bobby's chest tighten. The German Shepherd's ears were pinned forward, his entire body vibrating with nervous energy that had nothing to do with wanting a walk. "He's been like this since dawn," Margaret said, jingling the keys. "Frank thinks we should have him put down. Says a traumatized dog is a liability." The words hit Bobby like a physical blow. Rex had been Tommy's pride and joy, trained from a puppy to detect drugs and track suspects. More than that, he'd been Tommy's family, the closest thing the bachelor cop had to a son. "Over my dead body," Bobby muttered, unlatching the kennel gate. Rex bolted past him, not toward the parking lot or the exercise yard, but straight toward the tree line that bordered the old Hartwell property. Bobby followed, his arthritic knees protesting with each uneven step. Margaret grabbed a leash and hurried after them, her clinic shoes slipping on the damp leaves. "Rex, heel!" Bobby called, but the dog was beyond commands now, nose to the ground, following some invisible trail that pulled him deeper into the woods. They emerged into a clearing where the old civil defense bunker sat like a concrete tumor against the hillside. Built in 1962 when nuclear war seemed inevitable, it had been abandoned for decades, its entrance sealed with rusted steel plates and warning signs. Rex ran straight to a section of ground about 50 feet from the bunker entrance and began digging with desperate intensity. "What's got into him?" Margaret panted, catching up. Bobby knelt beside the dog, noting how Rex's claws were already bloody from scratching at the hard-packed earth. This wasn't random behavior, this was purposeful, urgent, like Rex was trying to reach something specific. That's when Bobby saw it, a glint of metal in the disturbed soil. He brushed away the dirt with shaking fingers and felt his world tilt sideways. Tommy Sullivan's badge, tarnished but unmistakable, lay buried just inches beneath the surface. "That's impossible," Margaret whispered. "Tommy's badge was recovered from his car." Bobby's mind raced. He'd been to the crash site himself, seen the twisted metal and shattered glass at the bottom of Devil's Curve. The official report said Tommy had been speeding, possibly fell asleep at the wheel. Case closed, tragedy explained, nothing suspicious about a tired cop making a fatal mistake on a rainy night. But Tommy's actual badge was here, buried in a forest 40 miles from where he supposedly died. Rex continued digging, his paws now bleeding freely, small whines escaping his throat. Bobby pressed his ear to the ground and felt his blood freeze. Faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere deep below. Tap, 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 tap. The universal SOS signal. "Someone's down there," Bobby breathed, scrambling to his feet. "Someone's alive down there." Margaret's face went white. "That's impossible. The bunker's been sealed for decades." But Rex's frantic digging said otherwise. The dog knew something they didn't, had been trying to tell them something for months. Tommy's badge wasn't the only secret buried in this forest. Bobby pulled out his cell phone with trembling fingers. No signal. Of course, they were in a dead zone, surrounded by hills that blocked cellular towers. They were on their own, with a dog who insisted someone needed rescue, and a mystery that was about to tear their quiet town apart. "We need shovels," Bobby said grimly. "And we need them now." Bobby returned the next morning with a folding shovel from his garage and a thermos of coffee that had grown cold during his sleepless night. Rex was waiting at the kennel gate like he'd never left, amber eyes bright with anticipation that bordered on desperation. Margaret met them with a canvas bag containing bottled water, first aid supplies, and her husband's old camping gear. "Frank thinks I'm helping you exercise the dog," she said quietly, avoiding Bobby's eyes. "I didn't tell him about the badge." They worked in shifts, Bobby's arthritic hands cramping around the shovel handle while Rex supervised with military precision. The dog would bark once when they hit the right spot, circle anxiously when they drifted off course. It was like following a treasure map written in canine instinct. 3 feet down, Bobby's shovel struck something that wasn't earth or rock. A metallic clang echoed from below, followed immediately by a response. 3 sharp taps, then 3 more, then 3 again. The SOS pattern was unmistakable now, desperate and deliberate. "Dear God," Margaret whispered, dropping to her knees beside the hole. "There's really someone down there." Bobby cleared away more dirt, revealing the edge of a ventilation grate that had been camouflaged with branches and soil. Fresh scratches in the metal suggested recent use. When he pressed his face to the opening and shouted, a weak voice floated up from the darkness below. "Help! Please! Sarah Williams! Channel 7 News!" Margaret's intake of breath was sharp enough to cut glass. Sarah Williams had been missing for 3 months, vanished while investigating a series of disappearances in rural Virginia counties. The police had assumed she'd moved on to another story, another city. Her car was found abandoned at a truck stop 200 miles away, leading investigators to believe she'd left voluntarily. But Sarah Williams was here, 20 feet underground, very much alive and very much trapped. Bobby fumbled for his cell phone, his hands shaking so badly he could barely dial. Still no signal. The hills that made Millbrook feel protected from the outside world now felt like a prison. They were isolated, alone with a discovery that would shatter everything the town believed about safety and trust. "We have to go back," Bobby said, his voice cracking. "Get help. Get equipment. What if we're too late when we come back?" Margaret's practical nurse training was kicking in. "What if whoever put her down there realizes we found her?" Rex settled the debate by refusing to leave. The German shepherd planted himself beside the ventilation grate and fixed Bobby with a stare that spoke volumes. This was his post now. This was his mission. He wouldn't abandon it any more than he'd abandoned Tommy. Bobby made the longest walk of his life back to his truck, every step feeling like betrayal. By the time he reached town, his mind was spinning with questions that had no good answers. How long had Sarah been down there? Who had put her there? And why was Tommy's badge buried at the site? The Millbrook Police Department occupied a converted Victorian house on Main Street, all creaking floors and insufficient parking. Bobby found Captain Patterson in his office, reviewing reports with the concentrated focus of a man who took his responsibilities seriously. Frank looked up with genuine warmth. They'd known each other for 15 years, shared coffee and conversation about everything from fishing to grandchildren Frank would never have. "Bobby, good to see you. How's our 4-legged friend doing?" "Frank, I need to report a crime in progress." Bobby's voice sounded foreign to his own ears, formal and distant. "We found someone trapped underground at the old Hartwell place, a woman. She's alive but in immediate danger." Patterson's expression shifted from friendly to professional in an instant. "Slow down. What exactly did you find?" Bobby explained about Rex's behavior, the badge, the ventilation grate, the voice identifying itself as Sarah Williams. With each detail, Patterson's face grew more skeptical, his questions more pointed. "You're telling me a traumatized dog led you to a missing reporter who's been underground for 3 months? Bobby, do you hear how that sounds?" "I know how it sounds, but you've been under a lot of stress since Clara passed. Retirement's been hard on you. Maybe your mind is playing tricks." The dismissal stung worse than a slap. Bobby had served this community for 4 decades, had never filed a false report or cried wolf, but he could see the doubt in Patterson's eyes, the careful consideration of an old man's mental state. "I'm ordering you to stay away from that property," Patterson said, his tone shifting from friendly to authoritative. "The Hartwell land is part of an active development project. You're trespassing, and you're interfering with economic progress this town desperately needs." Bobby left the station feeling more alone than he had since Clara's funeral. The one person who should have believed him, who should have mobilized resources to save Sarah Williams, had essentially called him crazy. But Rex was still waiting at that ventilation grate, and Sarah Williams was still trapped in the darkness below. Whether Captain Frank Patterson believed him or not, Bobby had a job to finish. Bobby returned to the Hartwell property that evening with a Coleman lantern, rope, and the grim determination of a man who'd been dismissed one too many times. Rex hadn't moved from his post, lying beside the ventilation grate with the patience of a soldier on watch. The dog's loyalty shamed Bobby. While he'd been arguing with bureaucrats, Rex had maintained his vigil. "Sarah?" Bobby called into the opening. "Can you hear me?" "Yes." The voice was weaker now, hoarse from dehydration. "Please, don't leave me again." Bobby's chest tightened. "I'm not leaving. We're going to get you out of there. How many others are down there with you?" A long pause. 3, no, 4. 2 women, 2 men, 1 man. He's not moving anymore. The magnitude of what they'd discovered hit Bobby like a physical blow. This wasn't just about Sarah Williams. This was about multiple victims, a systematic operation that had been running under their noses for months, maybe years. The peaceful facade of Millbrook was hiding something monstrous. Margaret arrived an hour later with medical supplies and news that made Bobby's blood run cold. "I did some research at the clinic," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 4 people have gone missing in surrounding counties over the past year. All young adults, all last seen at truck stops or rest areas along Route 29. She spread out photocopied missing person flyers on the tailgate of Bobby's truck. 4 faces stared back at them. A college student from Charlottesville, a waitress from Lynchburg, a construction worker from Fredericksburg, and Sarah Williams. All had vanished without a trace, their cases growing cold as weeks turned to months. "There's something else," Margaret continued, glancing nervously toward the tree line. "Frank's been acting strange since these disappearances started, working late, taking calls at odd hours. He's always been dedicated, but this is different. More secretive." Bobby studied her face in the lantern light. Margaret Patterson was not given to dramatic statements or wild theories. If she was questioning her husband's behavior, there was good reason. Over the next 2 days, they established a routine. Bobby would arrive at dawn with Rex, bringing food and water that could be lowered through the ventilation grate. Margaret would come during her lunch break from the clinic, using her medical training to assess the victim's conditions through shouted conversations. Sarah was coherent but weak. The others were in various stages of dehydration and despair. The underground space was larger than they'd initially realized, a series of connected chambers that extended well beyond the original civil defense bunker. Someone had been using this place for months, possibly years, expanding the tunnels and installing crude but effective containment systems. This wasn't the work of a single disturbed individual. This required planning, resources, and knowledge of the area's history. On Thursday afternoon, Bobby made a discovery that changed everything. While Rex napped in the afternoon sun, Bobby explored the area around the bunker entrance, looking for other access points. Behind a tangle of honeysuckle vines, he found tire tracks, recent ones, with a distinctive tread pattern that hadn't been there during their previous visits. Someone else knew about this place, someone with regular access. That evening, Margaret brought troubling news from town. 3 families have asked about their missing relatives this week, she reported. Word is getting out that something's happening here. People are starting to ask questions. What kind of questions? About the development project, about why the police haven't been more active in investigating the disappearances. Frank's been fielding calls from families from other police departments. The pressure's building. Bobby felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. If whoever was responsible for this operation felt cornered, the victims underground might become liabilities rather than assets. The tapping from below had grown fainter over the past day, suggesting the captives were weakening rapidly. Friday brought the first real break in the case, though it came from an unexpected source. Bobby was refilling Rex's water bowl when the dog suddenly tensed, ears pricked toward the access road. The German Shepherd's training kicked in. He dropped into a crouch, becoming nearly invisible against the fallen leaves, but his amber eyes tracked movement that Bobby couldn't yet see. A white pickup truck was making its way slowly down the dirt road, driving without headlights despite the approaching dusk. Bobby grabbed Rex's collar and pulled him behind a large oak tree, heart hammering as the vehicle stopped near the bunker entrance. Two men emerged. One Bobby recognized as Deputy Carl Hendricks, a 20-year veteran of the department. The other was a stranger, heavy-set with prison tattoos visible on his forearms. They moved with the efficiency of a practiced routine, one man standing watch while the other unlocked a camouflaged entrance Bobby hadn't noticed before. "Delivery tomorrow night," Hendricks was saying. "Boss wants them moved before the weekend." "What about the old man and his dog?" the stranger asked. "Word is they've been sniffing around. Boss is handling it. Says he's got it under control." Bobby's mind reeled. Deputy Hendricks, a man he'd worked alongside for years, whose children he'd watched grow up, was part of this nightmare. And there was a boss who knew about Bobby's investigation, who was planning to handle the situation. They watched the men disappear into the underground complex, emerging 20 minutes later with grim expressions. "The one in Chamber 3 is gone," Hendricks reported. "Boss isn't going to like that." After the truck disappeared, Bobby and Margaret sat in stunned silence. The scope of the conspiracy was becoming clear. This wasn't just about a few criminals operating in secret. This involved law enforcement, people with access to missing person reports, people who could control investigations and manipulate evidence. "Frank," Margaret whispered, her voice breaking. "He has to know. He's the captain." Bobby didn't want to voice what they were both thinking, that Frank Patterson might be more than just aware of the operation. He might be running it. Saturday morning brought a development that forced their hand. Bobby arrived at the site to find Rex agitated and pacing, whining in a way the dog had never done before. When Bobby called down to Sarah, there was no response. The silence from below was absolute and terrifying. "We're out of time," Bobby told Margaret when she arrived. "We have to go down there." Margaret had brought rope and a battery-powered lantern from the clinic. They'd also stopped by the hardware store for bolt cutters and a crowbar. If the official entrance was locked, they'd make their own. The descent into the bunker was like entering another world. The air was thick and stale, carrying odors that made Bobby's stomach turn. Their lantern beam revealed a corridor that stretched into darkness, lined with doors that looked like they belonged in a prison rather than a fallout shelter. Rex led them with sure steps, his nose guiding them through the maze of tunnels. The German Shepherd knew this place, had been here before, probably with Tommy, Bobby realized with growing horror. Tommy had found this place months ago, had been investigating it when he died. Except Tommy might not be dead. The first chamber they found contained two bodies, a young man and woman who had clearly been dead for days. The second chamber was empty, but showed signs of recent occupancy. In the third chamber, they found them, Sarah Williams, unconscious but breathing, and 3 other victims in various states of consciousness. But it was the fourth chamber that nearly broke Bobby's heart. Tommy Sullivan lay on a makeshift cot, alive but barely recognizable. His face was gaunt. his left leg clearly broken and never properly set. But his eyes were alert, and when he saw Rex, the reunion was heartbreaking in its intensity. "I knew you'd find me, boy," Tommy whispered, his voice raw from months of captivity. "I knew you wouldn't give up." Rex whimpered and pressed against his former partner, careful not to put weight on Tommy's injured leg. The dog had been trying to tell them for months. His partner wasn't dead, just lost, waiting for rescue that had taken far too long to arrive. "Who did this?" Bobby asked, though he dreaded the answer. Tommy's eyes hardened. "People we trusted." "People who were supposed to protect and serve? It goes higher than you think, Bobby, higher than any of us imagined." From somewhere above them came the sound of vehicles arriving. Multiple engines, car doors slamming, the organized chaos of an operation in motion. Rex's ears pricked forward, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. They were no longer alone in the bunker. And judging by the number of footsteps echoing through the corridors above, they were severely outnumbered. Heavy footsteps echoed through the concrete corridors above, accompanied by the crackling of police radios and barked commands that made Bobby's blood freeze. These weren't rescuers. They were the cleanup crew Hendricks had mentioned, arriving exactly when promised. "Bobby Mitchell, we know you're down there," Captain Patterson's voice boomed through the bunker's ventilation system, distorted but unmistakably authoritative. "Come out now and we can discuss this like civilized people." Tommy gripped Bobby's arm with surprising strength. "Don't trust him," he whispered urgently. "Patterson's been running this operation for years. My investigation got too close, so they staged my death." Rex positioned himself between the chamber entrance and his wounded partner, every muscle tensed for battle. The German Shepherd's training had prepared him for exactly this scenario, protecting victims while hostile forces closed in. His amber eyes reflected the lantern light like twin flames of determination. "How many exits?" Bobby asked, helping Sarah Williams sit up against the concrete wall. The journalist was conscious now, though her movements were slow and deliberate. "Two that I know of," Tommy replied. "Main entrance where they came in, and an emergency tunnel that connects to the old mine shaft about a quarter-mile east. But it's partially collapsed." Margaret pressed her back against the chamber wall, clutching her medical bag like a lifeline. "Frank will listen to reason," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "He's still my husband. Somewhere inside, he's still the man I married." The sound of systematic searching grew closer, doors being kicked open, chambers being cleared with military precision. Bobby counted at least 4 different voices, maybe 5. They were trapped 20 feet underground with injured victims and a dog who would die before abandoning his duty. "Mr. Mitchell?" A new voice, younger and less familiar. "This is Deputy Marcus Shaw. Captain Patterson wants to speak with you personally. He says to tell you this is about more than just these people down here." Bobby recognized the name. Shaw was fresh out of the academy, probably didn't understand what he'd gotten involved in. There might be a chance to reason with him, to make him understand he was protecting human traffickers rather than serving justice. "What does that mean?" Bobby called back, playing for time while he assessed their options. "He says to tell you it's about your wife's medical bills, about the pharmacy records that show she was getting medications that weren't prescribed by her doctor." The words hit Bobby like a physical blow. Clara's cancer treatment had been expensive, yes, but they'd managed it through insurance and savings, except there had been those experimental drugs, the ones her oncologist couldn't officially prescribe but had quietly recommended. Bobby had found a way to get them, had paid cash and never asked too many questions about their source. "You see, Bobby," Patterson's voice was closer now, probably just one corridor away. "We all have our little compromises. Your wife lived an extra 18 months because of medications that came through unofficial channels, the same channels that fund this operation." Margaret gasped, understanding immediately. "The missing prescription drugs from the clinic," she whispered. "I thought it was just sloppy inventory, but Frank always volunteered to handle the reports." Tommy struggled to sit up straighter. "They've been blackmailing half the town," he said. "Anyone who's ever needed something they couldn't get legally, medications, immigration help, loans when the bank said no. Patterson offers solutions, then owns you forever." Sarah Williams found her voice, weak but determined. "That's why I came here." 3 other journalists died investigating similar operations in Virginia. Car accidents, overdoses, a hunting accident, all ruled coincidental. The systematic searching stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, Bobby could hear whispered conversations, the soft static of radio communications. They were planning something, coordinating for a final push. Rex suddenly tensed, his ears swiveling toward the chamber entrance. The dog had detected something the humans had missed, footsteps approaching from a different direction, moving with stealth rather than authority. "Emergency tunnel," Tommy breathed. "They're coming from both sides." Bobby made a decision that went against every instinct developed over 40 years in law enforcement. Instead of surrendering, instead of trying to negotiate, he turned off the lantern and plunged them into absolute darkness. "Everyone stay quiet," he whispered. "Rex, guard." The German Shepherd understood immediately, moving to cover the main entrance while Bobby felt his way toward the chamber's back wall. His fingers found what Tommy had described, a crude opening that had been chipped through the concrete, leading to older tunnels that predated the Cold War bunker. "This way," he breathed, guiding Margaret and Sarah toward the opening. "Can you carry Tommy?" "I can walk," Tommy insisted, though his grunt of pain suggested otherwise. "Just get me vertical." The emergency tunnel was a nightmare of loose stone and timber supports that creaked ominously with every movement. Bobby's flashlight, kept off until now to preserve their position, revealed a passage barely wide enough for one person, stretching into darkness that seemed to swallow the beam. Behind them, flashlight beams began sweeping the chamber they'd just abandoned. Shouts of confusion, anger, and growing urgency echoed through the concrete corridors. Rex had followed them into the tunnel but kept looking back, torn between protecting his human pack and maintaining his post. "Go," Tommy told the dog. "Lead them out. I'll be right behind you." They crawled through 200 yards of hell, loose stones cutting their hands and knees, timber supports groaning overhead like the whole mountain was settling on their backs. Margaret's nurse training kicked in as she helped Sarah navigate the narrow passage, while Bobby supported Tommy's weight and tried not to think about tons of earth above their heads. The tunnel opened into a natural cave that connected to the old Hartwell mine, abandoned since the 1940s but still structurally sound. Bobby's flashlight revealed minecart tracks disappearing into multiple passages, a testament to decades of copper extraction that had honeycombed the entire hillside. "Which way?" Margaret asked, her voice echoing strangely in the larger space. Rex made the decision for them, nose to the ground as he followed a scent trail that led toward what Bobby hoped was fresh air. The German Shepherd's confidence gave them all strength. If Rex believed they could escape, they would escape. 20 minutes of stumbling through mine passages brought them to a shaft of actual daylight, thin and gray but unmistakably real. The mine's old entrance was partially collapsed but passable, hidden behind decades of vegetation growth that provided perfect camouflage. They emerged into late afternoon sunlight on the far side of Hartwell Mountain, 3 miles from where they'd entered the bunker. Bobby's truck was useless to them now. Patterson would have it under surveillance. But Sarah's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and Tommy needed immediate medical attention. "There's a hunting cabin about a mile north," Tommy said, leaning heavily against a tree. "My brother uses it during deer season. Should have a radio, maybe even cell coverage." The mile-long hike through dense forest tested everyone's endurance. Sarah collapsed twice, forcing them to rest while precious minutes ticked away. Rex ranged ahead and behind, ears constantly scanning for pursuit that seemed inevitable. The cabin was exactly where Tommy remembered. A modest structure with solar panels and a radio antenna that looked like civilization's last outpost. But as they approached, Bobby noticed something that made his heart sink. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt driveway. Someone had been here recently. "It's okay," a familiar voice called from the cabin's front porch. "I've been waiting for you." Margaret Shaw, Deputy Marcus Shaw's mother and the town's retired postal worker, emerged with her hands raised in a gesture of peace. At 73, she moved with the careful dignity of someone who'd seen too much of life's complications. "Marcus called me 20 minutes ago," she explained. "Told me what's really been happening in this town. Told me his captain ordered him to do things that don't sit right with a Christian conscience." Bobby remained cautious. Rex pressed against his leg. "Where is Marcus now?" "Gone to the state police," Margaret Shaw replied. "Should be back with federal agents within the hour. My boy might be young, but he knows right from wrong when it's spelled out for him." As if summoned by her words, the distant sound of helicopters began echoing through the valley. Not the single aircraft of a local police response, but the coordinated thunder of a major federal operation. Someone had finally listened. Someone was finally coming to help. But Bobby's relief was tempered by the knowledge that Patterson's operation had been years in the making, with tentacles reaching throughout local government and law enforcement. How many other victims were still out there? How many other communities were hiding similar secrets beneath their peaceful facades? Rex pressed closer against Bobby's leg, the dog's warm presence a reminder that loyalty and courage could emerge from the most unexpected sources. Sometimes salvation came not from institutions or authorities, but from the fierce devotion of those who refused to abandon the innocent. The helicopters were getting closer. The helicopters arrived with the coordinated precision of a military operation, but what emerged from them wasn't salvation. It was Captain Patterson himself, flanked by men in tactical gear who moved with the efficiency of a private military contractor rather than federal agents. Bobby's heart sank as he realized they'd walked into a trap more sophisticated than anything he'd imagined. "Mrs. Shaw," Patterson called out, his voice carrying the friendly authority that had fooled everyone for years. "Thank you for calling us. You did the right thing." Margaret Shaw's face crumpled with confusion and growing horror. "Marcus said the state police." "Marcus is a good boy, but he's young. Sometimes young people get confused about who the real authorities are." Patterson's smile was paternal, almost gentle. "Don't worry. We'll sort this all out." Bobby felt the trap closing around them like a vice. There had been no call to state police, no federal agents coming to the rescue. Patterson had used Deputy Shaw's mother as an unwitting accomplice, convincing her to gather the escapees in one location for easy collection. The old woman's devastation was heartbreaking. She genuinely believed she was helping. Rex sensed the deception immediately, his hackles rising as he positioned himself between Patterson's men and the cabin. The German Shepherd's training recognized hostile forces regardless of their uniforms, and his low growl carried a warning that made everyone freeze. "Easy, Rex," Patterson said, his tone shifting to the voice used for dangerous animals. "We're all friends here." But Rex wasn't fooled. The dog's amber eyes tracked every movement, every gesture, reading body language and intentions with the accuracy of a polygraph machine. These weren't rescuers. These were the same people who'd been running the underground operation, now forced into the open by Bobby's stubborn investigation. "Frank," Margaret Patterson stepped forward, her voice breaking with 25 years of marriage crumbling in real time. Please tell me this isn't what it looks like." Patterson's expression softened as he looked at his wife, and for a moment Bobby saw the man Margaret had married, someone who genuinely wanted to protect and serve, who'd believed in justice and community. But that man had been buried under years of compromise and moral flexibility. "Maggie, you don't understand the complexity of what we're dealing with here," Patterson said, using his pet name for her. "These people, they're not innocent victims. They're part of a larger problem that requires unconventional solutions." "What problem?" Bobby demanded, supporting Tommy's weight as his former partner struggled to remain standing. "What problem requires kidnapping and murder?" Patterson's composure cracked slightly. "The problem of human garbage, Bobby. People who contribute nothing, who drain resources, who make communities unsafe. Sarah Williams wasn't just some innocent journalist. She was investigating things that would have destroyed this town's economic future." The words hung in the air like poison, revealing the twisted logic that had allowed Patterson to justify years of atrocities. He'd convinced himself that some lives were worth more than others, that community prosperity justified individual sacrifice. "Our daughter," Margaret whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. "When we lost Emma, you said you'd never let that happen to another family. But this isn't protection, Frank. This is becoming the monster." Patterson flinched as if struck. Emma died because the system failed her, because bureaucrats and bleeding hearts tied our hands while predators walked free. "I swore I'd never let that happen again, and I haven't. This town has the lowest crime rate in Virginia because I control who stays and who disappears." Tommy struggled to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "How many, Frank? How many innocent people have you killed to maintain your perfect crime statistics?" "Innocent?" Patterson's laugh was bitter and broken. "You want to know about innocence, Tommy? Emma was innocent. 8 years old, walking home from school when a convicted sex offender, someone who should have been locked away forever, snatched her off the street. We found her body 3 days later." The raw pain in Patterson's voice was genuine, and Bobby felt an unwilling stab of sympathy for the man who'd lost everything that mattered. But understanding the source of Patterson's madness didn't excuse the victims who'd paid the price for his grief. "So you became judge, jury, and executioner," Sarah Williams said, finding strength in her anger. "You decided who deserved to live and who deserved to disappear. How is that different from the monster who killed your daughter?" Patterson's face twisted with rage. "Don't you dare compare me to that animal. Everything I've done has been to protect this community, to keep families safe." "By destroying other families?" Margaret Shaw stepped forward, her 73-year-old frame shaking with righteous fury. "My Marcus called me crying tonight because he thought he was helping criminals. That boy hasn't cried since his father died. But you made him question everything he believed about right and wrong." The tactical team was growing restless, weapons trained on Bobby's group while their leader descended into a public breakdown. These weren't police officers bound by rules of engagement. They were mercenaries paid to follow orders without questions. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Rex sensed the shift in tension, his body coiling for action. The German Shepherd had been trained to protect innocent lives, and everyone in that cabin except Patterson and his men qualified as innocent. When one of the mercenaries shifted his rifle toward Sarah, Rex made his decision. The attack was swift and brutal. 100 pounds of German Shepherd launched through the air with perfect precision, taking down the nearest gunman before anyone could react. The man's scream echoed through the valley as Rex's jaws found their target, disabling the threat while avoiding lethal damage. Chaos erupted instantly. Bobby tackled Margaret Shaw to the cabin floor while Tommy threw himself over Sarah Williams despite his broken leg. Margaret Patterson stood frozen in the crossfire, unable to process that her husband's men were pointing weapons at her. "Stand down!" Patterson screamed at his team. "Do not fire! My wife is in the line of fire!" But the mercenaries were operating on adrenaline and training now, not orders. Rex had neutralized one threat, but 3 others remained, and they weren't bound by emotional considerations about wives or community relations. They were paid to eliminate problems, and everyone in that cabin had become a problem. The sound of gunfire shattered the mountain quiet, not the controlled pop of pistols, but the harsh chatter of automatic weapons that spoke of professional soldiers rather than small-town police. But the shots weren't coming from Patterson's men. They were coming from the tree line, where actual federal agents had been watching the entire confrontation unfold. Deputy Marcus Shaw had made his call after all, and the real authorities had arrived just in time to witness Captain Patterson's complete confession and the attempted execution of witnesses. As smoke cleared and dust settled, Bobby found himself staring at the ruins of everything he'd believed about his community, his colleagues, and the thin line between order and chaos. Rex limped back to Tommy's side, wounded but victorious, his mission finally complete after months of trying to tell anyone who would listen that something was terribly wrong in the heart of their peaceful town. The real federal agents moved through the aftermath with practiced efficiency, securing the scene while EMTs rushed to treat the wounded. But for Bobby Mitchell, watching from the cabin's front porch as his world reorganized itself around devastating truths, the chaos felt surreal, like witnessing the collapse of a theater set he'd believed was permanent architecture. Agent Diana Walsh, a 20-year veteran of the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force, knelt beside Bobby as paramedics examined Rex's bullet graze. The German Shepherd had taken a round across his shoulder but remained alert, his amber eyes tracking every movement in the clearing. "Mr. Mitchell, I need you to understand something," Agent Walsh said quietly. "What you uncovered here. This operation has been on our radar for 18 months. We've been building a case, but we needed someone on the inside to lead us to the victims." Bobby's blood chilled. "You knew about the underground bunker. You knew people were trapped down there, and you didn't—" "We suspected," Walsh interrupted, "but we didn't know locations, didn't know the full scope. Human trafficking networks are like icebergs. What you see on the surface is maybe 10% of the actual operation. Without concrete evidence, without witnesses, our hands were tied." The words felt like acid in Bobby's throat. "So Sarah Williams, Tommy Sullivan, all those people, they were bait. You let them suffer while you built your case?" Agent Walsh's expression remained professionally neutral, but Bobby caught a flicker of something that might have been guilt. "We saved 14 people today, Mr. Mitchell. 14 people who would have disappeared forever if not for your persistence and that dog's loyalty." Sometimes the math is terrible, but it's still math. Across the clearing, Margaret Patterson sat in the back of an ambulance, her 25-year marriage dissolving in real time as FBI agents read her husband his rights. Captain Frank Patterson stood with his hands cuffed behind his back, no longer the community leader who'd commanded respect for 2 decades. Now he was just another criminal being processed by a system he'd spent years corrupting. "Maggie," Patterson called out as agents prepared to transport him, "I need you to understand. Everything I did was to prevent another Emma. Every single choice was about protecting families like ours." Margaret Patterson looked up from her hands, tears streaming down her face. "We never had another Emma to protect, Frank. We never had another child because you were too broken by losing the first one. And now I find out you've been destroying other people's children in her memory." The raw pain in her voice carried across the clearing, silencing even the federal agents who'd seen every variety of human breakdown. This wasn't just the arrest of a corrupt cop. This was the complete demolition of a woman's understanding of the man she'd loved for a quarter-century. "Mrs. Patterson," Agent Walsh approached Margaret with the careful respect reserved for collateral victims. I know this is overwhelming, but we're going to need your cooperation in understanding how extensive your husband's network became. Margaret's laugh was bitter and broken. You want to know the worst part? I thought he was having an affair. All those late nights, the secret phone calls, the money appearing in accounts I didn't recognize. I was relieved when I thought it was just another woman. An affair I could have forgiven. Bobby understood that sentiment with painful clarity. Infidelity was human-scale betrayal, something that happened in normal marriages to normal people. But discovering your spouse had been orchestrating the disappearance and murder of innocent civilians, that was betrayal on a cosmic scale that no marriage could survive. Tommy Sullivan was loaded into a medical helicopter, his condition stabilized but requiring surgery to repair damage from months of inadequate medical care. Before the doors closed, he gripped Bobby's hand with surprising strength. "Rex saved my life every day down there," Tommy said, his voice hoarse but determined. "When I wanted to give up, when the pain got too bad, I'd think about that dog waiting for me. He never stopped believing I was coming home." Rex limped over to the helicopter, standing as tall as his wounded shoulder would allow. The reunion between the German Shepherd and his former partner was heartbreaking in its intensity, Rex whimpering with joy while Tommy scratched behind his ears through the aircraft's open door. "Take care of him, Bobby," Tommy said as the medical team prepared for departure. "He's earned his retirement, but he's not ready to quit serving. That dog's got more heart than half the humans I've known." As the helicopter disappeared over the mountain ridge, Agent Walsh returned with news that made Bobby's stomach clench. "We've found 17 bodies in the expanded tunnel system," she reported quietly. "Some recent, some older. Patterson's operation goes back at least 5 years, possibly longer." 17 families would receive the worst possible news. Their missing loved ones weren't coming home after all. 17 sets of parents, siblings, children who'd held on to hope through months or years of uncertainty would now face the finality of confirmed death. "How did he justify it to himself?" Bobby asked, watching as crime scene technicians documented evidence that would ensure Patterson never saw freedom again. "How does someone convince themselves that mass murder is community service?" Agent Walsh had worked enough cases to understand the psychology of systematic killers. He started with genuine monsters, convicted pedophiles, repeat violent offenders who'd slipped through legal cracks, built a network of people who agreed that some criminals deserved extrajudicial punishment. But mission creep is inevitable in vigilante organizations. The definition of deserving to die keeps expanding until it includes anyone who threatens the group's sense of order. Margaret Shaw approached them, her elderly frame moving with the careful dignity of someone processing unimaginable revelation. "Agent Walsh, I need to know about my Marcus. Is my boy in trouble for what he did tonight?" "Mrs. Shaw, your son is the reason we were able to move when we did," Walsh replied gently. "His call to state police triggered our response. Without his courage to question orders, more people would have died tonight." The relief in Margaret Shaw's eyes was profound. At 73, the thought of losing her son to legal consequences for doing the right thing would have been unbearable. But Walsh's next words tempered that relief. "However, there will be investigations. Anyone who worked with Patterson, even unknowingly, will face scrutiny. The entire department is compromised until we can determine who knew what and when they knew it." Bobby understood the implications immediately. Millbrook's police force would be effectively disbanded, replaced by state or federal oversight until the corruption could be rooted out completely. The town that had prided itself on low crime rates and community policing would learn that both had been built on a foundation of systematic murder. As evening approached, the media arrived in force. News vans lined the access road, reporters broadcasting updates about the Millbrook horror to a nation increasingly numb to stories of institutional corruption and betrayal. Sarah Williams, despite her ordeal, insisted on giving a statement from her hospital bed. The journalist in her understanding that this story needed to be told completely and accurately. "The real hero here is a German shepherd named Rex," she told the cameras, her voice still weak but determined. "When every human system failed, when law enforcement became the enemy instead of the protector, it was a dog who refused to abandon the truth. Rex never stopped searching, never stopped believing that someone would listen." Bobby watched the coverage from the cabin where he'd been asked to remain for further questioning. Rex lay beside him, the dog's wounded shoulder professionally bandaged, but his spirit unbroken. The German shepherd's eyes tracked the activity outside, federal agents, crime scene technicians, media crews, with the alert attention of someone who understood his job wasn't finished yet. "What happens now?" Bobby asked Agent Walsh during one of their informal conversations. "Now comes the hard part," she replied honestly. "Trials, investigations, community healing. Patterson's network extended beyond Millbrook. We've got evidence of similar operations in 3 other Virginia counties. This is going to take years to fully unravel." Bobby looked down at Rex, whose tail thumped weakly against the cabin floor at the attention. The dog had spent months trying to tell anyone who would listen that something was wrong. Now that the truth was finally exposed, Rex seemed content to rest, but not to retire. "I think Rex and I might have found our new purpose," Bobby said quietly. "There are probably other towns, other victims, other cases where someone needs to listen to what the animals are trying to tell us." Agent Walsh smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth Bobby had seen from her. "The FBI could use consultants with your particular expertise, Mr. Mitchell. Unconventional problems sometimes require unconventional solutions." As night fell over the Blue Ridge Mountains, Bobby Mitchell sat with his hand resting on Rex's head, watching his community grapple with the revelation that evil could wear a badge and speak in the language of protection. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more investigations, more painful truths. But tonight, for the first time in months, Rex slept peacefully. His mission accomplished, his loyalty vindicated, his faith in the bond between human and animal proven stronger than corruption, stronger than betrayal, stronger than the darkness that had tried to consume their small town. Sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected sources. Sometimes the most important voices belonged to those who couldn't speak at all. 6 months later, Bobby Mitchell stood in the morning sunlight outside the newly constructed Millbrook Memorial Garden, watching Rex demonstrate tracking techniques to a group of K9 handlers from across Virginia. The German shepherd moved with confident precision despite the slight limp that remained from his gunshot wound, a badge of honor that seemed to enhance rather than diminish his authority among the younger dogs. "He's teaching them more than just scent work," observed Dr. Jennifer Hayes, the veterinary behaviorist who'd been documenting Rex's recovery and training methods. "He's teaching them to trust their instincts even when humans doubt them." The memorial garden occupied the space where the Hartwell bunker had been sealed permanently with concrete. 17 oak trees, one for each victim, cast gentle shadows over engraved stones bearing names and remembrances. But the garden was more than just a memorial. It was a training facility for the Virginia K9 Victim Recovery Program, a statewide initiative that had emerged from the Millbrook investigation. Bobby's role as program director still surprised him sometimes. At 68, when most men his age were settling into retirement routines of golf and grandchildren, he'd found himself busier than ever. The FBI consultant position Agent Walsh had offered had evolved into something larger, a systematic approach to using specially trained dogs to locate victims of human trafficking and other crimes where traditional investigation methods had failed. "Bobby, you need to see this," called Sarah Williams, approaching with her characteristic determined stride. The journalist had made a remarkable recovery, both physically and professionally. Her investigative series on the Millbrook case had won a Pulitzer Prize, but more importantly, It had sparked legislative changes in how missing person cases were handled across rural America. She handed him a tablet displaying an email from the sheriff's department in Loudoun County. 3 missing persons in the past month, all last seen near truck stops along Interstate 66. The pattern matches what we saw here. Bobby felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with the possibility of other victims, other families waiting for answers. Rex lifted his head from the training exercise, ears pricked with interest as if the dog had sensed the shift in human attention towards serious work. "What does the local law enforcement think?" Bobby asked, though he suspected the answer. "They're calling it coincidence, blaming it on people choosing to disappear rather than face their problems." "Sound familiar?" Sarah's voice carried the bitter edge of someone who'd learned not to trust official explanations. Margaret Patterson approached their group, her transformation over the past 6 months both heartbreaking and inspiring. The former police captain's wife had aged years in a matter of months, but there was strength in her bearing that hadn't existed before, the strength of someone who'd faced the worst possible truth about their life and chosen to rebuild rather than retreat. "I've been monitoring police radio traffic," Margaret said quietly. "There's been no serious investigation in Loudoun County, no coordination with state agencies, no requests for federal assistance. It's like they've learned nothing from what happened here." Margaret's expertise had proven invaluable to the program. Her years married to a police captain had given her insights into law enforcement culture and procedures, while her experience as Patterson's unknowing accomplice had taught her to recognize the signs of institutional corruption. She'd become the program's liaison with families of missing persons, helping them navigate bureaucratic indifference with the passion of someone who understood personal loss. Tommy Sullivan joined their impromptu meeting, moving slowly but steadily with the aid of a walking stick. His recovery had been remarkable considering the months of inadequate medical care, but he'd never returned to active police duty. Instead, he'd found new purpose training K-9 teams in victim recovery techniques, his bond with Rex serving as the gold standard for human-animal partnerships in law enforcement. "Rex has been restless the past few days," Tommy reported. "Something's got his attention, but I can't figure out what. He keeps staring northeast, like he's hearing something the rest of us can't." Bobby looked at Rex, who had indeed oriented himself toward the northeast, the direction of Loudoun County. The German Shepherd's behavior during the Millbrook investigation had taught them all to pay attention when Rex showed sustained interest in anything. The dog's instincts had proven more reliable than official reports or bureaucratic procedures. "We should go," Bobby said simply. "Unofficially, of course. Just a retired cop and his dog visiting another part of the state." Agent Walsh had maintained contact with their group, providing federal support when local authorities proved uncooperative. But she'd also taught them the value of gathering preliminary evidence before involving official agencies, evidence that could be dismissed as coincidence when presented by concerned citizens, but carried weight when supported by documented patterns and physical proof. The drive to Loudoun County took them through Virginia countryside that looked deceptively peaceful in the late spring sunshine. Rolling hills and horse farms created a pastoral scene that belied the darkness they'd learned could lurk beneath rural tranquility. Rex rode in the passenger seat of Bobby's truck, alert and focused in a way that had become familiar over their months of partnership. Their first stop was the truck stop where the most recent victim had disappeared, a college student named Michael Chen, who'd been driving home to Maryland for his sister's wedding. Security cameras showed him purchasing coffee and using the restroom at 2:47 a.m., but his car was found abandoned 3 miles away with no signs of struggle. Rex's reaction to the truck stop was immediate and intense. The dog's hackles rose as they approached the building, and he pulled toward a specific area behind the main structure where semi-trailers parked for overnight rest. His behavior was unmistakably similar to what they'd witnessed at the Hartwell property, urgent, purposeful, and focused on something invisible to human senses. "He's got something," Tommy observed, watching Rex strain against his leash toward a particular spot near the tree line. Same body language as when he found the bunker entrance. Sarah Williams had brought her camera equipment, documenting Rex's behavior while Bobby and Tommy searched the area for any physical evidence. What they found was subtle but significant. Tire tracks that didn't match any of the commercial vehicles currently parked at the facility, and disturbed vegetation in a pattern that suggested recent activity. But it was Rex who made the crucial discovery. The German Shepherd led them to a drainage culvert that ran beneath the highway, its opening camouflaged by carefully arranged branches and debris. Inside the culvert, Bobby's flashlight revealed what appeared to be a temporary holding area. Zip ties, empty water bottles, and personal items that clearly didn't belong to highway maintenance crews. "Michael Chen's wallet," Sarah said quietly, photographing the evidence without disturbing it. "Driver's license, credit cards, $43 in cash. No one abandons their wallet voluntarily." The discovery pattern was chillingly familiar. A rest stop where victims were selected, a concealed holding area where they were processed, and transportation routes that could move people without detection. The Millbrook operation hadn't been unique. It had been part of a larger network that was still operating. Tommy's phone buzzed with a text message that made his face go pale. "Agent Walsh," he reported. "She says federal surveillance has identified unusual activity at 3 other truck stops along the I-66 corridor. They want us to maintain our position and not approach any other locations." Bobby understood immediately. They'd stumbled into an active federal investigation, and their presence could compromise ongoing surveillance operations. But looking at Rex, who continued to strain toward the northeast with unwavering certainty, Bobby knew the dog had more to tell them. "What do you think, boy?" Bobby asked quietly, kneeling beside Rex and looking into the intelligent amber eyes that had become his most trusted guide. "Are there more people out there who need finding?" Rex's response was a soft whine of urgency, followed by a gentle but insistent pull toward the highway. The German Shepherd had work to do, victims to find, and a mission that transcended official investigations or jurisdictional boundaries. As they waited for federal agents to coordinate the next phase of the operation, Bobby reflected on how much had changed since that morning when Rex first led him to the Hartwell property. They'd saved lives, exposed corruption, and created a program that was helping other communities face similar challenges. But most importantly, they'd proven that sometimes the most important voices belonged to those who couldn't speak, and that loyalty, courage, and determination could triumph over the darkest human impulses. Rex pressed against Bobby's leg, ready for whatever came next. This story reminds us that our most meaningful chapters often begin when society says we should be winding down. Bobby Mitchell, at 67, found his greatest purpose not in retirement, but in listening to a voice no one else would hear. Rex's unwavering loyalty pointing toward truth when human institutions failed. Like so many of us who've weathered decades of life's storms, Bobby discovered that wisdom, persistence, and the courage to trust our instincts become our greatest assets in our later years. Rex teaches us that loyalty isn't about youth or strength. It's about refusing to give up on what matters most. Their partnership proves that the bonds we forge through shared purpose can heal the deepest wounds of loss and betrayal. In a world that often dismisses the contributions of older Americans, Bobby and Rex show us that experience, dedication, and an unwillingness to look the other way can literally save lives. Sometimes our greatest adventures, our most important work, our deepest sense of meaning arrive not despite our age, but because of it. The love between a man and his dog, tested by tragedy and triumph, reminds us that the most powerful forces in life, loyalty, courage, and hope, only grow stronger with time. What unexpected partnership or friendship has brought the most meaning to your later years? Have you ever trusted your instincts when everyone else doubted you? And what was the outcome? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear about the wrecks in your life who helped you find purpose and joy.